If you've been following my channel for a while now, you'll know that I've been on the search for a black clay and glaze combination that work well together. A pair that I can reduction fire to cone 10 without the pieces slumping, degassing, cracking, or warping, or well, any of those errors, really. It seems like black clays come with a lot of issues at the temperatures I go to, and thus, in this week's video, which is sort of the second part of the series, I'll be showing you the results of my latest black clay test. Some previous tests have been successful, such as with this lined vase, and this stepped bowl too. Ultimately, I think some of the changes I have to make are structural, as these types of clays that contain a ton of colorants, be it stains or iron or manganese, just aren't that reliable. Thus, I'd love to find a clay body that I can throw and trim as thinly as the pinky red stoneware you currently see me using a lot. So, the test for this video is this stuff. 371 by Pottery Passion, or Schwartz as it's sold in the UK through my supplier. Which isn't a very inventive name, but hopefully it's a good sign of the colour this stuff will turn once fired. By the way, the reason I'm testing this body is that in my previous disastrous video about black clay, tons of you recommended this. Anyway, I mentioned this was part 2, as I've already produced a video that shows the throwing and trimming of these pots. I'll leave a link to that video on screen now and in the description below. In short, I'm not sure this clay will stand up to my firing temperature, so I've made 3 tests, 2 of which I've diluted with my usual clay to hopefully strengthen it. This might change the final colour of the clay, but if it stops these thinly trimmed cups from slumping in the firing, then that's a good thing. Slumping, by the way, is what can happen when the clay gets too soft, as it isn't really manufactured to withstand certain temperature ranges, and thus, when it's exposed to those temperatures, the pots themselves will begin to droop, and I imagine with these, this will occur on that angular section just above the foot. In many ways, I don't have high hopes for the clay, and I'm half expecting all of these to distort slightly in the kiln. But to try and give them the best hope of surviving, I'll pack them in the coolest spot in the kiln on the bottom layer, rather than on the higher shelves, where it remains hotter for longer. Irritatingly, as it always goes, I actually really like the colours at this stage. The sort of matte, neutral tones they have are always really appealing, so it'll be interesting to see what happens to these as they're fired. The next step for these bowls, once they've turned completely bone dry, is to pack them into my electric kiln for a biscuit firing to 1000 degrees Celsius. Simply put, this is a process that changes clay into ceramic. As it's heated, the particles that make it up begin to fuse together. We call this process vitrification, and what we're looking for biscuit-fired pottery is clay that's only been partly vitrified. As in order for glazing to work properly, we need the clay to still be absorbent. Essentially, at this point, the ceramic is full of all of these tiny tunnels, into which water can easily be absorbed. The clay is also stiffened up enough that it no longer disintegrates in water. This means that any water absorbed into the body will simply either pass through it, or stay there until it evaporates. If you're looking to glaze your pots with thicker layers of glaze, it can be helpful doing a slightly lower temperature biscuit firing, as it means they'll be more absorbent, yet it comes with the downside of being more fragile. You can also do the inverse if you're glazing your pots with thin layers of glaze. You can fire them to a hotter temperature, this way they won't absorb as much water and therefore a thinner layer of glaze will adhere to them. The next step for these is to wax their feet. This essentially just creates a barrier through which water can't pass. Therefore, wherever the wax is coated, glaze won't adhere to the ceramic. And for these, I'm going to be glazing the entire foot and even inside the foot ring too. As with previous pots made with this glaze, in combination with black clay, when there's a trapped internal space, like this, the glazed surface becomes bubbly and boiled, which is something I think I want to try and avoid. And if the clay does indeed fire black, well, then you shouldn't really be able to tell much of a difference when certain areas of it are left bare. The next step is glazing these. This specific black glaze creates a wonderful matte, almost gunmetal surface, but it has the tendency of settling really quickly, and I think in all honesty, I might have to ditch it soon, as it's so sensitive to glaze application that it can be a real nuisance to work with. Yes, I'll have to tidy that up. The thing is, if I glaze these pots with tongs, even if I tidy over the tongue marks really thoroughly, they still show in the finished object. Thus, I'll be glazing these in 2 goes, first the outside, like so, and then once that layer has dried, I can pour more glaze into these, swirl it around and tip it out. I'm hoping this method will create less lumps and bumps on the glazed surface, which therefore means the fired finish will be more even and uniform. Yes, this does mean the glazing process takes longer, but if that means the finished results are neater, then I really don't mind spreading this step out across 2 days. It's now the following day, and the glaze on the outside of these has dried out. To coat the insides, I simply pour glaze into them, quite close to the rim, as this makes swirling it around towards the top much easier, as I don't have to tip the pot over to one side quite so much. Then, to pour it out, I fully twist my wrist in one direction, and then pour the glaze out as I twist my wrist back. That was a pretty shoddy first attempt, but at least it covered the entirety of the inside surface. Now, what I should have done is held these pots upside down until the glaze had completely dried, as this way drips and slightly thicker surfaces of glaze wouldn't have settled on the interior surface, which, even though I did ultimately get rid of them, scraping them back carefully, they still showed in the finished fired glaze, which is another reason why I think I'm going to ditch this glaze until I've got a spray booth at least, as by applying it that way with a spray gun, I should be able to achieve a really smooth, flush finish across the entire piece. In a way, I wish I had more than 3 to glaze, as it always takes a few to get into the swing of things when glazing like this, and it is, for all intents and purposes, quite a satisfying procedure. A few hours later, after all of the glaze has dried out, I can begin to tidy these up. Essentially, I want to get rid of any drips or thick spots that cover the surface. There was a slight amount of overlap around some of the rims, but this was only bad on one of them, in my attempt where I poured that inner glaze out more slowly, which gave it more time to roll around the rim and spill over the outside. The quicker I was when tipping the glaze out, the neater the glaze around the rim was. With thinner glazes like this, the tidying up process is actually just so much faster, as compared to my usual work, which is coated with much thicker, felspathic crackle glazes. And it's again, another time where I think I should completely transition all of the glazes I use onto thinner ones like this. Not only are they easier to apply in an even layer, but you end up using less glaze per piece. The tidying up process is faster too, and ultimately, and perhaps most importantly, it allows the sharp, angular nature of the work to really shine. But therein is the difficulty, almost, as it can be tricky finding enough character with these thinner glazes, and I never feel quite as satisfied with them in terms of surface quality and interest. The best tool for this is my fingertip, really. It acts like sandpaper, in a way, and I use it to even out the areas where there are slight discrepancies in the surface. And then of course, around the very bottom, I use a sponge, just to make sure the line where glaze and clay meet is really neat and even. And with that, these 3 pots are ready to be packed into my gas kiln for their reduction firing to cone 10. I haven't fired the kiln in a while now, so before I get started I'm going to prep all my kiln shelves just to make sure they're in good standing for the next 4 or 5 firings I plan on doing. I start by scraping them with one of these silicon carbide sanding blocks. This flattens the surface and gets rid of any small inconsistency that's left over. I then make sure to get rid of as much dust as possible that's covering them, and then the final step is covering them in a new layer of backwash. I use a roller to do this, and I'm not applying much. A thin coat is usually enough, as the glazes I use don't have the tendency to run very much as it is. These are then packed into the kiln, and after packing the kiln, I'll preheat it for a little bit, just to make sure all the kiln shelves are properly dried out, as these types of shelves can explode if they're fired when still damp, leading to absolutely disastrous results. The next task I have to do is make some cone packs. This white stuff is wadding, and it's essentially the same recipe as the backwash I was painting onto the kiln shelves. Both are made from 50% coarse alumina hydrate and 50% china clay. Only one has much more water added to it than the other. These cones measure heat over time during the firing, and they're positioned inside the kiln opposite the spy holes in the door. This way I can see them, albeit quite difficult at times, especially during reduction, when more flames are swirling around inside the chamber. The cones are pressed in ascending order into the wadding. This way they melt in the correct sequence and don't stick to each other. I then slice away as much of the excess wadding as possible, as there's no point wasting too much of this stuff. You just want to make sure the cone packs themselves are stable, as the last thing you want is one of these toppling over during the firing, as if that happens you will lose critical information and you'll have absolutely no idea when to end the firing. You can also use clay to do this, and I suppose the most important thing is to just let them dry out before firing them, as if I stuck these in the kiln when they were still wet and started the firing, there's a good chance they would just blow up. I always place some refires across the front here, as it typically tends to underfire, and thus it's a good place to put pots that need another dose of reduction in heat, or even pots that have crawled or have significant pinholes which I've corrected and just need another firing. As the front here is relatively cool, this is where I'm going to be placing these black bowls. I'm also positioning them away from the burners, so they don't receive the brunt of the flame. The cone packs are raised up slightly, as otherwise it would be too low and I wouldn't be able to see it through the spy hole in the door. With these positioned, I then try to pack around them without obscuring the view of them too much, and from this point I continue packing the kiln until it's completely full. Another cone pack is positioned at the top, which of course is double checked. And with that done and the kiln now full, I tend to give the surrounding area a really good clean, just to get rid of as much dust as possible in the space. It's also, of course, given a good mop. Very early the following morning, the kiln is lit. The burners are ignited with the door open. This way there's some ventilation and gas can't accumulate within the chamber that's then suddenly ignited. I keep the initial rise in temperature relatively low, and I place a mirror on the floor like this just so I can see each of the 4 burners more easily, as sometimes when they're on the lowest setting they can just flicker out. I usually hear when this happens, but by positioning the mirror I can just check on them more easily, without bending down. I check the kiln every 30 minutes or so, and very gradually I increase the gas pressure following previous firing charts, so that I know I'm keeping on track. At about 550 degrees Celsius, I turn on the air compressor. I apologise for the noise, but this is something I live with for a majority of the firing during the day. It's horrible, isn't it? Despite this being one of the silent models that's sold. The good news is, at the start, it's not turned on much, as I don't need much air, but after reduction, which happens at 860 degrees precisely, it's turned up, and it tends to go off every 5 or 7 minutes. Speaking of reduction, to initiate this, I slide the damper to be half closed, and I dramatically increase the gas pressure and the air pressure. This creates a state within the chamber where there's too much fuel and not enough oxygen for it to burn properly. As a result, and as this atmosphere is seeking oxygen, it ends up stripping it away from the clay and glazes themselves, and it's this that creates the distinct blue and green colour of Celadon glazes, as the iron these types of glazes contain is chemically altered as oxygen is taken away from it. I keep the reduction going, and as the firing progresses I gradually nudge the dampers open, as this prevents the kiln from stalling and the temperature rise being too slow. Essentially, as it's opened, it means less gas can accumulate inside, as the exhaust can exit more quickly. As the kiln begins to reach top temperature, I look through the spy holes at the cones more and more, checking to see if they're starting to bend over, as soon as I notice that, I have to start checking the kiln more regularly, as the last thing you want is for the kiln to get away from you and overfire, as by doing so you'd risk destroying thousands and thousands of pounds of work. Throughout the rest of the day I've been doing other odd jobs in the workshop, but from this point on I'm pretty much with the kiln the entire time. I check the cones, both top and bottom, every 15 minutes or so, and I log the progress here, which should give you a good idea of how rapidly they start to fall over. I noticed that cone 8 started to bend at about 2 PM, and the firing was over at about 5 minutes past 3. The cones are checked one last time just to make sure cone 10 is fully bent over, touching toes, and thereafter the gas can be switched off, the firing now finally over. This is always a really gratifying moment, mainly as I'm now in a silent workshop. These tend to be quite noisy days, and maybe I should start looking for an air compressor that is more silent, but they start to become so expensive. I was told to get a compressor that had an 100-litre capacity, but truth be told I'm not entirely sure why, so if you folks do have any suggestions, I'm all ears. The last thing I do is crash cool the kiln back down to 1000 degrees Celsius. This helps to retain gloss and colour, and it prevents some of the glazes from growing crystals, which if too many amass can create completely matte grey surfaces. I fired on Wednesday and it's now Friday, and the kiln is cool enough to unpack. I tend to crack the door open, and I'll leave it like this for a couple of minutes just to let the last of that scalding hot air out. And I have to say, at this point, I really fully expected all of these to be slumped over. I thought at least one of them must have collapsed. But so far, they look pretty good. The black looks deep and strong and even across much of their surfaces. They're perhaps slightly more shiny than I imagined, but with all three of these, I don't think there's any distortions in their shapes, which is a huge relief. The only immediate thing I noticed is that the bare clay on the bottoms of these isn't really black, and there are some subtle differences in terms of the surface quality, which I think has come from my mixing of the clay. One of these was thrown from purely the black, another was mixed down by 50%, and another by a third. And I think in both of those cases, it's created a certain level of texture on the surface. Texture can of course be rather nice in some cases, but with these, and I will show you a close-up, it sort of feels a bit like a mistake. It isn't intentional enough. One of them has these small bloating marks around it, and a few tiny pinholes, but I almost don't mind that very much. The most irritating thing though is that the clay is most definitely brown. It might not come across very well in this video, but in comparison to the glazed body, which is very definitely black, the stoneware on all of these is pretty much the same brown colour, which is surprising, as I thought it would be really easy to distinguish which is which by the colour of the clay. The next step is sanding the bases of these, as despite the clay being burnished smooth at the leather hard stage, whenever you high fire a clay that contains grog, the clay itself shrinks around those coarse particles of pre-fired ceramic, meaning that even though I spent lots of time burnishing the feet of these, they still feel rough initially, so I give each one a quick sand using a wetted diamond pad. If you don't do this, and you were to drag one of these across, say, a wooden tabletop, it could very easily leave lots of scratches in its wake. So there are two things I like, the shapes and the colour of the glaze. But there are just as many cons. The texture on two of them, those I mixed down, is a bit hit and miss. And the colour of the clay, the brown, just sort of goes against this whole idea of using black on black. So going forward, I'll simply use this clay body by itself in combination with my usual glazes. But, irritatingly perhaps, this means I'm still on the search for a black clay, and I also need to find a new black glaze that's more manageable. I know I'm perhaps being a bit picky here, as ultimately these pots are quite nice. They just miss a lot of the markers I was aiming for, and there's a subtle patchiness across the entire piece in certain places, where the glaze was thicker, and I scraped it back down. They're about 50% of the way there, which I know might not seem very much, but really the easy thing about making these is achieving the shape. It's the surfaces and the clay that's a much harder thing to get right, as it requires far more testing. This is the Schwarz clay by itself. The surface is lovely and smooth, but there's some patchiness on the inside, and the stoneware is of course brown. Then there's the body I mixed down by a third of the regular iron-bearing stoneware I work with, and then the variant mixed by a half. And as you can see, the surface is really pockmarked, and even scratched in places. The glaze has settled into the additional texture created by the grog added to the body. Anyhow, I think it's time to go back to the drawing board with glaze test tiles and new black glaze recipes. If you have any good suggestions, I'd really love to hear them, as it's always nice having a good place to start. And thank you, as always, for taking your time to watch.